Welcome to the MMHP in the 989. Channeling all styles and eras of Michigan music history from the city by the bay. And now, here's your host, Scott Baker.
And we're back here for part 2 with the Gilmour brothers. We want to thank them for coming in here, and all of them took their time from out of state and made sure that they all gathered together for a mini reunion with us. Since part 1's been released, it ended up being a really huge success for us at the podcast, and there's a reason for it. The Gilmour brothers are a really great name that went on to do some successful ventures, and part 2 here is actually how they formed the Gilmour brothers part of all their history here, and it starts with Eddie and the Eat-Outs and goes right into the Gilmour brothers, and we can't thank them enough. So here's to them, and thank you listeners for digging into this show. Enjoy part 2 with the MMHP and the 989.
Well, how did you guys get connected with the owner of the Holiday Inn at Bay City?
Yes, Gary, you mentioned you wanted to talk about Eddie.
Eddie, yes, and the Eat-Outs.
Eddie happened by accident, and then subsequently the Gilmour brothers actually kind of started as a joke.
Yeah, it was.
A friend of mine and I threw a party, and we were living in Saginaw, and we wanted to throw a big special party. And so I knew that John's brother Greg Gilmour, and a friend of his, did this little act where they did a 50s routine, okay? And so I called Greg and I said, would you guys come and play at our party? And the other guy...
it was kind of like Shauna and I.
It was
only two guys and a little rougher.
Was it Jerry Light?
Yeah.
Jerry Light.
It was the other one, Jerry, yeah.
And so Greg told me that the other guy couldn't make it. So he said, so if you want to have it at your party, you're going to have to do it with me.
You're the Eat-Outs.
So I became the other guy. And we did the party, okay? And we just, it was just a one-off because later on I looked a lot different, but I've seen pictures of that party and I looked like I did a Buddy Holly kind of thing.
Yeah.
But later on we really went off the rails.
And Greg was the greased down.
Yeah.
Looked like he just got out of the penitentiary.
And he eventually totally influenced me in his,
Yeah, you ended up being grubbier than him.
Yeah. So one night we had gone out to the Bay City Holiday Inn, and Pat and Sandy McGuinn were playing in the lounge. Mm-hmm. And we knew Pat and Sandy. And I don't know how it happened. I always blame John for setting us up.
Well, I remember because they asked me to come up and play. I played with them, played mandolin or something. And then
Pat said something like, we have some special guests in the house.
That's right.
Eddie and the Eat-Outs, and Greg and I are sitting totally unawares. We're sitting there at the table just watching the show.
Because he goes at the party.
Eddie and the Eat-Outs. And we look at each other. So what we did was, and it was actually, you know how everything starts kind of high and then it just goes downhill from there? This was the peak for Eddie and the Eat-Outs. Greg and I both stood up at the table, took off our shirts, rolled up our T-shirts, dumped combs in our beer, slicked back our hair, and became Eddie and the Eat-Outs, and went up on stage and did our set. And everybody was like, what's this?
Came out of the audience and did this.
They loved it. It went crazy. But the crazy thing was Wolf happened to be sitting in the back of the room in the dark. Nobody even knew.
And he was checking the whole thing out.
Watching it.
So after the gig, Pat McGuinn says to us, if you guys added some other songs to this, you could actually have a gig here. So we thought, well, maybe we could do that. So at this time, John had already opened a music store in Bridgeport, Gilmour Brothers Music. He was running in Bridgeport. And Greg and I, who were not the businessmen of the group, never did anything like that. We go to Bay City to the conference room in the Holiday Inn and sit down with Wolf Heflin, and we're going to discuss what kind of deal we can work out to have a gig. Okay?
And if you want two guys you don't want negotiating for you
Those two.
about anything, it'd be those two Yahoo's.
So Greg is sitting at the table with me, and Wolf, he's like, well, so, what do you want?
And Greg's thinking he'd do it for beer.
Greg would have done it for beer and maybe a fish dinner every week.
Right. Sure, he would've.
And I said, $500.
Which was about twice what Sandy and Pat and Sandy were getting.
And Greg literally slid half under the table at that point because he was scared that Wolf was going to come
Get mad.
and grab us by the collars and throw us out. And Wolf goes, okay, I'll give you 2 weeks. We'll see how it goes.
And he says, "Can you start Tuesday?" I
Can
think
you
it was.
start Tuesday?
And this was on Saturday, right?
Something like that.
Yeah.
So then we go back to Bridgeport and tell John, who has absolutely no idea what we've just done.
I didn't even know there was a meeting. I never heard of any of this. Yeah.
Totally, we walk in and say, we got a gig on Tuesday, 5 nights a week at the Bay City Holiday Inn. We got to learn a bunch of songs.
Yeah. And we didn't know, so you guys knew enough to do. We figured out, here's what we'll do. They actually wanted 4 sets. Remember that?
We did 4 sets.
I know it. Starting like at 7.
Believe me, we did 4 sets.
Yeah. So we figured all we got to do is 3 because the 4th set people are all drunk and you can repeat.
And that was Eddie.
Nobody knows.
That was
right?
Eddie anyway.
So we thought, here's
He
what we'll
didn't
do. That can be 1 set, Eddie Needhouse.
Yeah.
And then we know some of these Irish tunes. We could put together something and do kind of an Irishy set, right? Which is bizarre that we even thought of such a goofy thing. But and then the first set we knew a bunch of folky Dylan and typical, because it was the early part of the evening when people were sober and and that's how we did it, right? We did 3 sets, and the 4th set you were going to do anything.
But the thing on top of it was, because you were running this music store, you said, I can only come on Friday and Saturday.
Right.
And it was Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So Greg and I had to do 4 sets, just the 2 of us, on Tuesday,
Greg didn't know
Wednesday, and
anything.
Thursday. Yeah, we used to have to stop the car on the side of the road on the way to Bay City so Greg could relieve his indigestion problems on the way to the gig.
Nervous.
But we did 4 sets. I did a solo set, and then we did a jug band set, which we called Frank and the Fool.
Oh yeah.
And it was a takeoff on Eddie and the Eat Outs. And it was so much fun because, Greg would always get to say, we're Frank and the Fool. And he'd go, I'm Frank. I'm going,
All proud.
guess who I am? And then Greg and I did the Irish set, just the 2 of us.
Yeah.
This is just me and
Crazy.
Greg. And then we did Eddie and the Eat Outs. Probably one of the most memorable nights we had was I don't know if you were there that night, John, when we were doing Eddie and the Eat Outs, and we heard this laugh from the back of the room, and it was like, ha 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 ha, like that. And Greg, or Eddie, starts, he liked the repartee with the crowd, so he said, hold it down, honey, or something like that, or however he talked. And the more we did, the more this laugh kept coming out. Well, it turns out we finished our set and we go back in our green room, which was the kitchen. Louis Nye comes walking in, who was a Hollywood star in Beverly Hillbillies from back in the day. He was the man in the street on
Steve Allen.
Steve Allen, yes.
He was a household name.
Steve Areno, right?
He comes-
Hi-ho, Steve Areno.
That's right. Yeah.
He comes walking back into the kitchen and he just said, you guys just slayed me, and it was pretty funny. So we asked him if he had any tips for us, and he said, boys, I'm here playing for some ladies auxiliary and you're asking me for advice. That was fun.
That's
Well,
incredible.
one of the memorable evenings, my wife and I went over and saw you guys. You had some kind of a rig where, I don't know if you got an off-duty police
No.
officer
Oh, yes.
to have you handcuffed.
We shouldn't
You know.
mention any names. He might
Yeah.
still be liable.
Yeah, because that was
That was actually our last. That might have been about our last gig. We ended up doing the Holiday Inn for 17 weeks.
yeah.
Really?
Off that 2 weeks that he said we'll give you a try.
He was
Yeah.
actually a sheriff. That guy, the real.
He
deal.
was a real sheriff's deputy,
and
and he had the mirror, shades, and the whole
oh,
bit.
uniform.
And he brought us in handcuffs.
Yeah, that was pretty funny.
real ones.
Brought us up to the stage, and he stood there alongside the stage the whole time that we played.
Yeah.
Stiff as a board, expressionless. Greg and I did the whole set. He comes back up on stage, locks us back up, and carts us off. And after I changed and I came back into the room, somebody walked up to me and said, "Did you see that?"
Well, they didn't even know.
Yeah, that was quite a night at the Holiday Inn.
Yeah, I was.
That was
there.
quite a night.
Oh,
That
wow.
was really great.
So he would come in on a shift, kind of, or whatever it was, and just make sure
I
you guys.
don't know how he worked it out.
He's a friend of Greg's. Greg
Wow.
worked
He
out.
was a friend.
Was that all 5 nights of the week?
No, just that.
Just
that
that
was
one
a
show.
one-off.
One day.
Just
That
and
was
you
a one
happened to be
special
there.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was there
we had
too.
seen the show several times. You know. It was a big favorite of ours.
And
How
the
cool.
Holiday Inn had opened up the entire length of the inside because
Yeah.
they could panel it off and have
Yeah.
different rooms, but this was wide open all the way down.
Yeah, it
because
seated
was
like 400. I
it was
think.
packed.
Yeah.
That was cool.
Yeah, that was really a funky kind of place in Bay City. Yeah, really.
Yeah, I was
really
with the
neat.
Beantown Valley Ramblers at that time.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And we played in the big room on the weekend.
Yep.
And John Colhut and I played
Yep.
in the lounge during the week.
What years was the Eddie and the Edots and all this?
We started in '74.
Yep.
And from the Holiday Inn, we went to Bince's Apple Mountain,
Oh, yeah.
where I think
That's
Bince's is where we got acquainted with Frank
Frank
Starkweather.
Starkweather. And, yep.